Okay, Ivan. Hi. This is Eduardo. I think yes. I think that we can start the session, and yeah. I mean, if there are some specific comments or doubts or from people who miss some slides, yes, we can go back and explain something in further detail. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this I think this fourth or third session, but this is the third unit, and we will be we will present some of the experiences that we have in terms of the microsimulation models that we have applied across Latin American countries over the last almost 10 years now. So I will start with describing some of the main goals of these exercises, some of the background. Then Ivan will explain in further detail, as a continuation from the previous session. He will explain more about inequality indices, and then again I will take over as a presenter to describe in further detail some experiences that we think are worth for you to be familiar with. Okay, I'm taking over as presenter, and this will be the first slide. Yes. Okay. So the origin, the background of these microsimulation exercises goes back to 2009, 2010, where when in UNDP, jointly with a group of academics from several countries and from other institutions, thought about implementing these tools in Latin America, because at that moment microsimulation across countries in Latin America was mostly absent. It was very popular across Europe. It was very popular in the United States, in Australia, etc., mostly in developed countries. But in Latin America, yeah, basically there was no practice on microsimulation, at least on this type of microsimulation, which is based on microdata, which is based on households and individual characteristics. Yeah, most of the experiences that have been developed in Latin America are related to general equilibrium models with macroeconomic variables, etc. But accounting for the incidence of taxes, accounting for the effect of the fiscal system of fiscal reforms on inequality and poverty indicators, that sort of models were mostly absent. So at that point, 2009, in UNDP, jointly with the IDRC in Canada and this group of scholars, this was called the Fiscal Schemes for Inclusive Development, and the aim was to test basically how microsimulations would work in Latin America using Latin American data. And for that purpose, at that moment, we choose from a lot of countries. We choose 5. You are here we have this slide with the countries: Mexico, Guatemala, Brazil, Chile, and Uruguay, which were selected on the basis of first, the availability of income and consumption data. Secondly, because the heterogeneity of the economics in terms of the population size and in terms of how diverse, how different were the fiscal systems. For instance, Brazil, it's a huge fiscal system. They manage a lot of an incredibly amount of taxes, which are administered at the federal level, but also at the state level and also at the municipal level. So the Brazilian one is it's a huge and very complicated system. So that was for sure an interesting case. Mexico, which is a huge country with a relatively straightforward system. Chile and Uruguay, which are the champions in terms of improving the well-being in Latin America, and a relatively small and country, which is Guatemala, facing several social issues, right, in terms of poverty, inequality, etc. So this was the starting point, and then this was done, as I said, with academic purposes, just in order to see how the microsimulation behaved, what kind of results we could obtain from that experience, what would be the requirements in terms of the data sets, in terms of the information from administrative records, and apparently, not apparently, I was involved in that process, and I can assure you, not apparently, actually, it was a great experience, because we know that we cannot simulate, we cannot include the information from corporate taxpayers. We cannot include direct taxes or the amount of indirect taxes paid by the 1% households located at the top of the distribution, mainly because one of the flaws of the household surveys is that they are just a sample, a representative sample of the population, and those surveys don't capture the relatively small population located at the top. So, on the basis of that, bearing in mind that we are not simulating, we are not including the top 1% of the distribution, and we are not including corporate taxpayers, these models offer a good examination, a good approximation of the dynamics among households, among individuals. And it was also useful in terms of the public finance, in terms of how much of the tax burden on households and on individuals could be simulated, could be captured, could be, basically that. So in that regard, that experience was really good, and it allowed us to continue publicizing this type of exercises. And as you can see in this slide, after the academic experience, we started to working with several governments across Latin America, including the Dominican Republic, including Costa Rica, Ecuador, Salvador, Guatemala again, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Peru, Venezuela, etc. Because those countries, I mean, based on the initial experience, we started working with governments who were interested in simulating the potential effects, the potential impacts on poverty and inequality that soon to be proposed fiscal reform could have, right? So one representative case is, for instance, Mexico in 2013, very recently, just 4 years ago, which was mainly the government, the central government, wanted to implement a fiscal reform aimed at increasing the consumer tax rate in 1 percentage point, and also to tax foods and medicines, which are part of the basic basket of goods and services. So, based on that experience, publicizing these exercises, we managed to work with the Ministry of Social Development, and basically what we did was to, okay, let's use the household and individual data sets from the traditional income and consumption surveys. We translated the whole fiscal system to that model, to that survey, by imputing the taxes household pay, the deductions they pay, the benefits they receive, etc., etc. So we were able to observe, to compute potential effects on inequality from a change in some specific fiscal intervention. In this case, the rate to consumption. So that has been mostly the experience in terms of applications with governments, in terms of the design of public policy, in terms of targeting. And this Mexican case was representative, was a very significant case, because based on those results, based on the results of the microsimulation, this tool was very useful for the ministry to politically negotiate with the central government to change the purpose or to change the mechanisms of the fiscal reforms, because what we obtained was that an increase of this consumption, of these rates on consumption, would increase poverty by about 14 million people, if I recall correctly. So these tools at the level of households and at the level of individuals offer a potential, offer very valuable information, which is worth considering in before implementing a potential reform or introducing a new fiscal intervention. They can offer very valuable information for the design of these policies and for a well functioning of the policy making process. So basically, I mean, the 4 big areas of this microsimulation exercises, yes, was mainly the identification of potential areas, which I mentioned, which is improving targeting, improving or minimizing the effects on poverty and inequality. Of course, evaluate the progressivity and the incidence of fiscal policy from, as I said, in the Mexican case, by evaluating the potential change of the rates on consumption, we are able to observe how the distribution will move, and of course, consequently, to observe what is the level of what will be the change in the level of inequality, right? And finally, evaluate the impact of these policies. Which is important to emphasize here is that all these big 4 big areas, which is a very important advantage of the microsimulation exercises, is that this evaluation, this assessment are ex ante the implementation of the reform or the implementation of a new fiscal intervention. Of course, the evaluation could be ex post, but I mean, for the purpose of the policy design, for the purpose of improving the economic well-being for across the population, it's important to be done ex ante. And this has been mainly the experience in Latin America. I will go in further detail into these experiences a little bit later. And now I will pass the microphone to Ivan.
Thank you, Eduardo, and hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. This is a very brief parenthesis of what Eduardo is telling us about the experiences. But before going into actual cases of that Eduardo was going to tell us about, I wanted to retake on what we were seeing last week with the inequality indicators. And just because at some point Eduardo is going to talk about Kakwani and maybe Reynolds Smolensky, and I don't want you to be scared about that, about those names. I want you to feel familiar with those names. So the idea is, let's start with the concentration coefficient. And the concentration coefficient is basically, it's almost a Gini coefficient. But instead of measuring inequality of income, as we did last week with the Gini coefficient, we estimate the inequality of taxes, of how taxes are paid by the income distribution. And therefore, our intention, if we want taxes to be paid more by rich people, by higher income groups, then the concentration curve, which is similar to the Lorenz curve, is going to be more like an L shape, mirrored L shape. So it would be closer to the lower right-hand side corner of the graph. That would be a progressive taxation. And then if the taxation is regressive, and that means that people, everyone is poorer segments of the income distribution, or lower segments of the income distribution pay more taxes, then the concentration curve would be closer to the equidistribution line, all right? So once we understand the concentration coefficient, it is very easy to estimate the Kakwani index. Kakwani index is only the difference between the Gini coefficient at market income, which is market income, as you remember, is the income before any kind of intervention, that is before taxes or subsidies. And then we subtract that, the Gini coefficient market income, minus the concentration coefficient of the tax, of a particular tax. And then you see that those terms in brackets with a minus at the beginning. And that is because we want the Kakwani index to be positive when the tax is progressive, negative when it's regressive. And what happens when it's proportional? That is, that the tax is paid as a proportion of the income. If tax is paid as a proportion of the income, exactly one proportion of the income, then the concentration curve is going to be exactly the same as the Lorentz curve. And if that happens, then the Kakwani index is going to be 0, all right? So that's very easy. If you see a Kakwani that is positive, then it's because taxes are progressive. If you see Kakwani index below 0, a negative Kakwani, then taxes are regressive. If the Kakwani is 0, it's because it's proportional. Then what happens with Reynolds-Smolensky index? While we have the progressivity or regressivity of a tax with the Kakwani, with the Reynolds-Smolensky index, in addition to that, we can see what is the redistributional capacity of a certain tax. And in that case, we only subtract the Gini coefficient at market income before any kind of taxation, and then we subtract the Gini coefficient after taxes. You see there, I think what you see there is a GD. Well, the D is because in Spanish is después de impuestos. It's after taxes. So those are very two simple indexes that you're probably going to hear from Eduardo. And in the presentation, you will see the definition of the Kakwani and what are the positive and the meaning of positive, negative, and 0 values. And the same for the Reynolds-Smolensky index. This is exactly what I just told you. And with this, I finish my small parenthesis, and I'll give you back the microphone to Eduardo.
Thank you, Van. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, I mean, knowing in detail this, I mean, not in detail, because actually even for economists, which a lot of practice, the calculation of these indices can result a little bit complex. It is important to be aware to understand the logic of those indices, what they indicate. Of course, the Gini coefficient it's quite evident, because we have listened about Gini coefficient probably for years, and it's a very common measure of concentration. So we already know that a higher value of a Gini coefficient means higher inequality, and a lower value it's the opposite case, which is a lower level of inequality. So that is the most common index, but it's important to know what does it mean, the Reynolds-Smolensky and the Kakwani indices, because they can tell us, just depending on the sign, if they are positive or negative. We can say something about progressivity or regressivity of a specific fiscal intervention. So that's the importance of this parenthesis. And because when we when we implement these microsimulation exercises, we have to take into account that information, and we have to be able to report that for the government, right? We cannot say only that the status quo or a potential or a certain fiscal reform increases or diminishes or reduces inequality, but we have to be able to say that if a reform to any specific intervention, whether it is a tax or a social transfer, it is progressive or regressive, right? Regressive meaning that is affecting, basically it is affecting the population located at the lower end of the income distribution. So those are indicators that we have to consider and that we have to report, especially if we are working with governments. For instance, as you can see in these slides, one of the experiences is the Dominican Republic. So in the simulations we did, we have to report those indices, right? We have to know whether any potential reform to any specific intervention increases or reduces inequality, but also if that change, if the specific intervention change, it's progressive or regressive, and also to measure the redistributive impact of that reform, which is an indicator that we cannot obtain from the Reynolds and Smolensky index. So when I say at the beginning of my presentation that, for instance, in Mexico, we translated the whole system for households and individuals into the household survey, I am referring basically to this. As you can see in this slide, this is the interface of the fiscal microsimulation that was developed by Alberto Castañón, which is the specialist, and I think he's around here. Yes. So, but the important thing for you to see is, if you look at the blue table on the right hand side, you can see that we have let me check. We have several options of reform. For instance, here we are trying to simulate changes to a tax called the ITBIS, which is basically a special tax on alcohol, tobacco, alcoholic beverage in general, gasoline, diesel, LP gas, etc. Gambling. So those are those taxes that are commonly labeled as special taxes, right? So as you can see, based on the purpose of simulating the effect of changes, of any change in this tax, we can see in this blue table that we can model a lot of different options of a specific basket to be reformed, right? For instance, one basket that doesn't include the ITBIS, or a basket that includes that tax at 8% or at 18%, etc., etc. So we can try several options in order to evaluate same number of potential results. So just we can we can choose better. And this is basically to show you that this type of models are very comprehensive, are very rich, depending on the availability of data, of the data, and they allow us to offer a lot of options, both positive and negative options of policy reform. But in this interface, as you can see, we can have the information of, I don't know, the second column, the ITBIS. It shows the rate, which is basically indicates, for instance, the 8%, it indicates, the 18%, the third row indicates that that beer is taxed on 18% of this tax, and this tax can be applied to both to the value of this good, but also to the quantity, and it also states the price of this good. So all this information, all these details, we should be able to include all of these details into the simulation in order to have results that are very proximate to the current, to the actual system. Again, we are not including people at the top of the distribution. We are not including corporate taxpayers, but these type of models are powerful tools to evaluate and to offer potential policy responses at the level of households and individuals. They offer the possibility to evaluate the distributional impact across the population of any potential reform. So if we can on this interface we can, let me use this word, we can play with quantities, we can play with values with rates, with prices, etc. So we can manage to approach to a better a first case scenario, right? Which is one that minimizes social costs, but also maximizes the benefits in terms of the public finance, which is, and let me go back again to the case of Mexico. The aim of that fiscal reform was to increase the income from taxes by about 2 percentage points of the GDP of the country, and that came with the cost of increasing poverty by almost 14 million people. So what we did was to maximize that objective, that goal of fiscal incomes, but at the same time minimizing the social costs. So if I recall correctly, the best scenario we projected was a fiscal reform that doesn't tax food and medicine. That means the basic consumption basket, and but increasing taxes in other services, etc., and that will result in an increase of the fiscal incomes for the government by about 1 point something percentage points of the GDP, but the increase in poverty was really reduced. I don't remember the number, but it was something like 3 million probably, which were to be compensated through the targeting of specific social transfers. So this was a plan that was manageable from the policy-making process. And you can do that, you can have that kind of impact, you can have that type of influence just based on that, based on this simple, apparently simple interfaces. In this one, as you can see, you can simulate what happened, what is the distribution, what is the amount that household and individuals pay in terms of the taxes on income, and what would be the impact of a reform to this tax on income. Let me go to the next one. And yeah, basically those interfaces, after running all the the options that we introduce, after playing with these quantities, with these rates, we can have which I mentioned before, which is here is a summary for the Dominican Republic, which shows what would be inequality based on the status quo, what would be inequality reported by the Gini coefficient with the reform, and what would be the level of inequality by a proposal from the, I forgot what what CRES mean, but it is an entity of the government in the Dominican Republic. And what we see is basically that the proposal from this agency, the CREES, which was basically to increase taxes, to those special taxes, it implied an increase of inequality by about 1 point of the Gini coefficient, and as reported by the Reynolds and Molesky and Kagwani indices, it was clearly a regressive proposal. So we managed, or the main result of this exercise was to tell the policymakers, look, this is your current situation, this is the proposal from this entity. We think that this middle reform would be, if you want to do a specific reform, this could be the one that minimizes the social cost in terms of inequality. In terms of inequality, as you can see, the best one is the current system. But given that the government is interested and probably it needed some additional resources, the one proposal that minimized the social cost was this one in the middle. Yeah, thank you, Ivan. There is the Regional Center Sustainable Economic Strategy in the Dominican Republic. So you can say a lot of things from these exercises. You can derive specific and well-informed conclusions that will make you to move forward with a specific reform or not, and that is what makes these exercises interesting, because it faces you with a lot of political decisions, a lot of political pressure. So you need resources, because you need to you need to cover your commitments in terms of specific subsidies to specific services in specific regions of the country, right? But at the same time, you have to deal with potential increases in inequality or in poverty, or you can just simply not to be interested in increasing the amount of taxes, but you can be a policymaker that is just interested in improving the efficiency in how we collect taxes and how we distribute or how we redistribute through social spending, right? So working under the fiscal frontier, or working under the limit or under the current limit of fiscal incomes, we don't need more resources. I think, or these microsimulation models, they could tell me that I don't need more, I just need simply to redistribute and to change the targeting of some subsidies to improve the collection of taxes across this specific group of the population, etc., etc. The potentialities are plenty, and for instance, in this case in Ecuador, again, all these experiences are specific applications which we work jointly with the respective governments, and this was for Ecuador. But as you can see, even geographically, you can give reference and you can see where the impact of a specific reform or of a specific change, in this case of subsidies in energy, where they will concentrate, right? And then based on this information, you can cross this information on these maps with other information. For instance, the poverty the poverty rates at the municipal level or the state level, or the I don't know, the incidence of climate related events that are affecting more specific populations. So you can see, for instance, let's imagine that an earthquake took place in Ecuador in some specific zones, and as a result, some needs in terms of energy are some requirements in energy, or you have to provide some subsidies in terms of energy because of the disaster, etc., etc. So based on this, you can model where you can apply the specific subsidies in energy, because you need that in terms of you need to allocate that in those zones, geographical zones, specifically affected from a disaster or another event. I don't know. Which this is basically to show you the potentiality of the microsimulations. These tools are useful and are very valuable for us as a research goal, as a policy making purpose, and also for the government. But they are useful at the extent that we have access and availability of relatively good data sets. If you want to, again, using my first words, if you want to translate the whole fiscal system into a specific data set at the level of households and individuals, you have to be able to have income information in that survey as well as consumption survey. And if you don't have the same information in the same data set, then you can use a secondary data set. For instance, in many countries collect one household survey for income and another different survey capturing consumption variables. So there are some statistical and econometrical methods to impute the information into a single data set, as well as you can impute, I don't know, for instance, how much the government spends in some specific transfer, for instance, in scholarships or subsidies for schooling materials, etc. So you can impute based on the age of the individual, on how many members, of how many students per household they are. So you can impute several values into the same household, but you are assuming that you have relatively recent data set which will allow you to model the prevailing status quo in your society. The problem sometimes in the application of these exercises is that one of the data sets, one of the data sources are quite old. For instance, in Honduras, we try to simulate a tax reform for 2014, which was aimed at taxing the consumption on gas and on other several the basic consumption goods and services. And in order to model the consumption on several goods and services and gas and energy, etc., we didn't have a good data source, because the household survey capturing or collecting consumption patterns across households in Honduras was from 1998. That is almost 16 years old, which probably many patterns of consumption could change, have already changed in the country. For starters, probably the availability of broadband, the availability of smartphones, etc., etc. A lot of new and valuable information will be missed in this case. So at the end, we managed to offer to the government quite approximate result of the potential reform, but basically the main message from us to the government was, look, we have to invest, we have to collect a new data set showing the consumption patterns that reflects the reality of your country. Only in doing that we will be able to offer you specific social impacts of your potential fiscal reform. In the meantime, these are the results. You can see you will increase inequality or you will reduce poverty by something percent. But you have to be careful with interpretation. You have to be cautious about the messages. The main message is we need some good data sets. So as you can see, we have applied these models firstly for academic purposes to evaluate what we need what we needed in terms of data, what we needed in terms of data at the household and individual level, what we needed in terms of data from governments, provided from governments, in terms of administrative records, in terms of the amount of subsidies of spending in specific transfers, etc., etc. And once that we test that Latin America was ready for this type of exercises, we discovered that several governments across the region were eager to be part of these tools, to use these tools within their own facilities, because any potential change that you are intended to do will offer you plenty of options in terms of social and fiscal impacts, which are very useful for you as a government and for us, as an international organization that is interested in looking for the most efficient, the social cost efficient way to do things. This was great for us because we know based on evidence what we can offer and what governments and other organizations can do to improve the aggregate well-being of their societies. I don't want to talk more about this because I prefer for you to comment or to ask specific questions, but we will be going further in more detail in the next sessions in how to model specific taxes in specific public transfers, etc., etc. So this is basically in terms of the experience. Regrettably, in the Caribbean, we're still in many Caribbean countries, English-speaking countries, French-speaking countries, we haven't implemented this type of exercises. But I mean, this presentation is also for you, for the organization where you work. If you work from a government or an organization in the civil society or an NGO, you can be aware that these tools exist. These tools can offer plenty of information, which is crucial for a better policy design process. That's it. Thank you very much to you all. If you have any comments or doubts that you want to address here, please shoot. And if not, if you prefer later, then we can, as always, we can talk through the virtual forum. Ivan, I don't know if you want to add something. I'm not sure if I was clear, but I hope I was. If not, please let me know.
It was crystal clear, Eduardo. Thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation. Actually, I don't have anything else to add to your presentation. In the session in Spanish, while we see if somebody has a question, please ask. But in the session in Spanish, I was mentioning that that after hearing about the case of Honduras, I had the fortune to be in Honduras earlier this year, and I saw this great, unique registry of beneficiaries in Honduras, which is great. It's called this CENIS. CENIS is the institution actually that holds that registry and posting the web page. And I was thinking about the surveys, because obviously 1998 is quite long ago. And I found that they have this survey of a permanent survey of multi-purpose or household permanent survey of multi-purpose. And it would be interesting probably to replicate. I don't know if they actually the survey would allow us to do some micro simulation like the one that you did before, but it probably would be good to explore the possibility.
Yeah. Sorry.
And no, that was all I wanted to mention. And I see some people asking things. So please, Emma.
Yeah. No. Thank you, Ivan. And of course, I mean that's a good comment. It could be worth trying to see if it's possible to simulate something, because and that reminded me about one experience we had in Bolivia, and we had in Peru, actually. And I would like to comment. I'm sorry for missing this before. I mean, this is our experience, and these are the interfaces we have created. You can create the same using Stata or R software. We decided to use Excel because I mean it is a massive. I mean, it's very accessible for all. Most of us know how to use it, and whereas Stata and R requires more investment in terms of programming. But what in our experience, based on these interfaces, what we have worked on, it's on fiscal reform, changes to specific taxes or transfers, and their impact on poverty and inequality indicators. But in the case of Bolivia and Peru, the government was interested not in a microsimulation in terms of in fiscal terms, but in doing, let me call this way, a simulation of different scenarios of, for instance, in Peru was, they were interested on how poverty would change by increasing the amount and the number of beneficiaries of the recipient families of the conditional cash transfer scheme, which is called Juntos. So that is another possibility, right? In Bolivia, the interest from the government was to design a new scheme of to redistribute the gains or the earnings, the benefits from gas for the country. So how to redistribute those benefits, so those gas benefits across the municipalities in Bolivia, because until recently, I'm not sure about how it is done at this moment, but until recently, the redistribution of resources from the central government to the different municipalities was based only on population size, which was very regressive at some point. at some extent. So, and the government was aware of that. So they wanted to design a different mechanism. So this is not about fiscal simulations in terms of changing taxes, in terms of exploring who bears the burden, who receives the benefits. It could be, I mean, this fiscal toolkit, this simulation toolkit, may include a lot of potentialities like those that I mentioned before for Bolivia and Peru. There was a question about IT. No, we haven't produced yet a fiscal toolkit for IT, at least for in terms of the microsimulation. What we did 1 year ago, I think, was a contribution in terms of the multidimensional poverty measurement, but yeah, but as part of the fiscal toolkit as such, no, not yet. I think this is mainly due to I mean, the interest from the governments, right? I think that we, as a promoters of these tools, we have to publicize more the advantages, show the potentialities, and I am pretty sure that many governments across the Caribbean will be very interested in relying on some of these potential results. Thank you very much.
Eduardo, well, we haven't done microsimulation in IT, but I don't know if you check on the household service and if you think it would be possible to do it in the future. And there's another question asking, it says, perhaps there are other factors that impact on the implementation of the fiscal toolkit. I'm assuming the most be strong political will. And I think you are assuming correctly. I mean, you need this is the fiscal toolkit is driven basically by demand from the countries, from the governments. So obviously, without political will, it is really hard to do some microsimulation of the kind that Eduardo was talking about earlier.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and that will, yeah, I mean, yeah, no. I think I don't have anything more to add, but more than, yeah, if we publicize enough these data sets, these tools, I am sure that governments will be interested, and they demand, right? Because yes, in our experience in Latin America, yes, as Ivan said, it was driven by demand of the government, which depended on, in these specific cases, depended on the specific capacities of the local governments. Of course, I mean, the microsimulation in Mexico and in other large countries, they have a lot of capacities, they have a lot of knowledge. Mexico was a special case, but yeah, in several other countries, this is driven by the demand of the government, because they have the will, because they have an external voice to back their decisions, which are, for instance, the multiple results we can offer through these exercises, and also because at some extent they lack technical capacities in developing these tools. So, in fact, not only it's our goal, our aim to offer results of a specific reform, but to install these tools in the government facilities, to train the local teams so they can be able. I mean, this is about building capacities, right? Because once a tool is done, in the future, when another household survey is updated, they will be able to improve, to replicate the new impacts by themselves. So this is mostly the case in Latin America. It's the political will to do reform, the political will to do good reforms, and the political will to capacitate their local teams. So yeah, I mean, it could be interesting to check if the household survey in IT allows us to implement some results like this. I'm not sure, but it could be the case that it does. But let me check. All right. Ivan, if there are no more questions,
I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you all. If you have questions or comments later, please let us know through the forum. And yeah, either Alberto or Ivan or myself will be responding to your concerns and comments. Thank you very much. We'll meet next week, I think.
Thank you very much, and the rest of the week for everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.